Joining us now, Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, down under, now the president of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Your thoughts, Kevin, just on on hearing the latest, and you've also been on before talking about where we've been in the past. Are we making progress, and is it possible to come to some settlement in the next year, do you think, with China?
On the trade deal, yes. As we've been discussing on this program for a while, the underlying economic logic in Xi Jinping's mind, and I think in President Trump's mind, is this thing has to be put to bed, otherwise it wrecks markets completely. The president's got to re-elect, and Xi Jinping's got a softening economy domestically. Those two fundamentals haven't changed, and there's a lot of political theatre surrounding this in terms of who is seen to back down and not back down. I'm making a bold prediction here. It would be that between now and certainly probably Thanksgiving, we'll have some form of deal. There'll be a critique about how substantial it is and all the rest of it, but I think the underlying interests are there.
The Journal points out today that both President Trump and President Xi have hardliners that they need to, or that are putting pressure on them, maybe that they don't need to listen to, but that are putting pressure on this, and that could make things more complicated.
Yeah, the hardliners in both capitals should get together and have a group hug because they have the same sort of attitude to life, which is it's far easier for organised enmity between the two countries than any form of economic engagement. From a Chinese perspective, however, and I've just come from China yesterday, back to New York, they're pretty happy with the outcome. What they expected was that there'd be a reboot of the negotiations. Right. Tick, that was done. What they didn't expect was the other two gifts, if you like, which the president delivered. One was the announcement that there would be no new tariffs for the duration of the negotiations, and that had been a big factor in Chinese domestic market sentiment. But the second one, which really got them by surprise, was the statement on Huawei.
Although it seems like that's more complicated. It's not a clear on...
It's not... You're right. It's not as pristine as some of the reporting has suggested.
But explain this to me, because Secretary of State Pompeo sat where you were sitting just maybe a month ago and said this is a national security threat. He went to Australia. He went to all different countries in Europe and said to officials there, do not do business with Huawei. This is a danger to all the Western allies. This is a danger to our security. How can you have, if that's true on one side, can you use it as a pawn in the trade war on the other side? And you're seeing Marco Rubio and so many others come out and say that very thing.
Excellent question, Andrew. My successor as Prime Minister of Australia was the good loyal ally of the United States, put his hand up first and said, OK, the United States has said we shouldn't do business with Huawei, we won't. So it's been one of the few allies, actually, to have taken a clear position. If you were him this morning, you'd be feeling a bit like a mug. But go to the detail, and this is what Becky, I think, was pointing to before. If I look carefully at what Larry Kudlow has tried to do in explaining the president's fairly bald language in Osaka, which was there's a reconsideration of the listing of Huawei. Larry Kudlow is saying, well, it's not quite like that. What we're looking at is just elements of componentry which are sold by U.S. firms, which Huawei can access by other firms around the world. The devil will lie in the detail on this, but from a Chinese macro perspective, they see a big crack of light here. So in terms of the Osaka outcome, if you're sitting in Beijing this morning, we're sitting around the Politburo table. They do meet up on Monday over there. They're saying, hey, high five.
But it was never, did you ever really believe we were going to put Huawei completely out of business? It was always going to be we talked about the nuances again and again. We didn't describe what the nuances were, but you saw what the nuances are. Some components aren't involved in G5, and you're going to be allowed to do that. But it's two countries that are entrenched positions, and there's going to be middle ground that's finally arrived at. Being in Australia for so long, this is exhausting, your Huawei. It's just exhausting to hear about it.
It's exhausting
to
defend a position where effectively the U.S. government went around telling everybody one thing.
When you went around telling everyone there's no problem with Huawei and it was your favorite company. Where'd you go from there now? Now it is a big threat?
My view is it's either a big threat or it's not.
I know.
It can't be both.
I know. Okay. You knew that eventually something was...
All of this was either a negotiation where they were using countries like Australia and using us and lying on our set about it, or it was something else.
Lying and
Well, the intelligence agencies have been doing the rounds of the allies. And so the briefs, which I haven't seen because I'm not in office, have been clear-cut that in their view, this is the US intelligence agencies, that this requires action.
But this started a long time before the trade talks. I mean,
no.
I remember hearing stuff about this last year.
No, it's been going on for quite a while. It's had multiple iterations.
Australia, as important as China, and China, people say China's more important to Australia than, I think it's equally important to both probably countries in a lot of ways. But
we walk and chew gum down there.
right, but it is important. Did Australia ever have a problem with China's trade practices and intellectual property theft and partnering up with, or because it was so important and the elephant in the room, you just sort of look the other way and you need them economically?
Our view over successive Australian governments has been basically in line with President Trump's critique, and that is that there are fundamental elements of China's international trade practices and use of non-tariff barriers, as well as other questions of intellectual property, which need fundamentally to change. The question for us as a smaller economy than yours, the United States economy, is what do you then do about it? What we sought to do with friends and allies through the World Trade Organization is work collectively with the Chinese. That didn't work. The president is now trying a different strategy. I hope it does deliver an outcome. The President of the United States is a master of the photo op. I just want to be confident that he actually delivers the outcome here.
I mean, what are the chances that you can get concessions from China that are real and lasting?
I think the Chinese move only to the extent that it suits their domestic economic agenda. And what's really interesting is, take some of the liberalizations recently by the Chinese on capital markets. For example, issuing of new licenses to people like JP Morgan and others to be able to operate more freely within Chinese capital markets. You might say, well, that's a good move, but you need to understand that the background to that is that China faces in the next several years the possibility of a current account deficit. So they actually need net import of foreign capital in the future. So they move to the extent that it meshes with their domestic economic interests.
Well, maybe that works for us in terms of intellectual property, where they now have some stuff they'd like to protect. But in terms of what happened this weekend, you said there were two things the Chinese didn't expect. One was the Huawei situation. The other was to say that you're not going to have additional tariffs while we continue these talks, at least for now.
Yeah.
Does that help or hinder things in the long terms in terms of what type of deal gets put in?
Look, if I was being blunt about it, I think the Chinese will see the United States as having blinked a bit in these discussions in Osaka.
Even though we could turn around and say tariffs are back on tomorrow, and even though the Huawei
given the president can do
is
that, and he has shown form on this, so of course he can do that in the future, the Chinese will take some comfort that the bottom line is that a deal can be had which won't fundamentally undermine their interest. The Chinese have already published 3 big red lines which they won't move on. And they won't, because it's been the front page of the newspapers. It would be political suicide within the Communist Party to now backtrack on those. And these are big-ticket items in terms of what the United States' negotiating position has been so far. But I think the take-out message from Osaka will be, we can get there. And the president, that is President Trump, really wants a deal.
Talking about photo ops real quick, Kim Jong-un.
There's a photo for you.
Would have you had that meeting yourself, and do you think that advances the cause or sets it back?
Well, I've been to North Korea twice in my time. I escaped on both occasions, but it's a very strange country. To answer your question, it's a remarkable photo, but what I fear is, and those of us who watched the North Korean nuclear negotiations over decades, is where is the diplomatic strategy to bring it about? And again, this is a big, as it were, concession to North Koreans. Kim Jong-un, in his domestic media, delivers a presidential visit. That actually is enhancing his internal credibility within the regime. So I'm not sure it actually helps deliver the outcome. I hope it does. I hope there's something bigger going on behind the scenes that I can see. But it strikes me as a bit of a gift.
Okay. All right. Former Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister. It's not fair down in Australia. People here get to keep their titles.
Yeah, well, we're just kind of different down there.
We do, and we can't. You're not Prime Minister anymore, so we're going to not call you that anymore.
Well, I just put it down to our convict origins. We're all criminals.
Exactly, which is what I could call you president now, since you're president of the new Asia Society. Right?
Yeah, that makes me president of about 25 people. Yeah, that's good.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you.